Welcome to the Chester Dark Age Tube Map. Now this is a resource I'm putting together to support my talk at the Chester Heritage Festival, where I will be speaking about after Rome, Chester in the Dark Ages. And I thought to help navigate what is often a very difficult period for people to understand in the story of Chester, and indeed in the story of Britain, I would put together a new resource to help guide people about the monuments, sites, and sites of discoveries in and around Chester that date to the early Middle Ages, popularly still known as the Dark Ages, between the 5th century AD and the 11th century AD. The first point to make is that the Chester Heritage Festival is continuing throughout June, and there's many events and exciting activities both online and in person taking place. For my part, I will be contributing not only online a blog post and this video, but also a talk on the final day of the festival, the 27th of June. And here you can find the details on Monday the 27th of June, after Rome, Chester in the Dark Ages, and there's a little rationale. It's at 12 o'clock and there's a link to join the event. So it's all the rage at the moment to dismiss the idea of the early Middle Ages being a dark age, and this debunking has gone back many decades. And it's actually a subject I've addressed on my Archaeo-Death blog. And last summer I discussed on a podcast, episode 1 to 2 of English Heritage's podcasts, I discussed illuminating the Dark Ages, looking at early medieval Britain afresh. And the point I made is that while we know so much about the archaeology and history of these islands between the 5th and 11th centuries, the popular association with it being a Dark Ages is in many ways perpetuated by the lack of tangible ruins, monuments, physical sites that people can go and say, that's a Dark Age site. And I did in my blog a list of all the English heritage sites, and this also applies to Caddo sites too, where you can see sites that are multi-period, or are Roman in date but have later histories, or have mythologies and legends stemming back from the early Middle Ages associated with them. But there are very few sites, only the 1066 Battle of Hastings site, Abbey and Battlefield, King Doniet Stone in Cornwall, Otter's Chapel at Deerhurst, Offa's Dyke, and the Sandbach Crosses, which are exclusively or primarily early medieval or Dark Age. And therefore I think that helps to perpetuate the point that there are very few sites where you can access the early Middle Ages, and therefore I think that continues the idea. You can go to a ruin of a medieval abbey and it may originate in the early Middle Ages, but most of what you see is going to be how the abbey looked at the dissolution in the early 16th century. Or you go to a ruined castle, and while there may be bits of that date back to the late 11th, 12th century, most of what you see is going to be later. Or you look at prehistoric and Roman sites, where there may be later stages to those sites' use, but you're mainly focusing on those prehistoric and Roman era phrases. The broader rationale also comes from the fact that I'm a member of I'm a co-founder and co-convener of the Offa's Dyke Collaboratory, a research network that's not only looking at the long, complex story of frontiers and borderlands, particularly focusing on the Anglo-Welsh borderland, but particularly looking at linear earthworks. And one of the great challenges for understanding these monuments is not only their dating and debating their function, but the broader difficulty of identifying sites in their broader landscapes. And one of the ways I thought that we could address a further challenge, namely how people learn about these monuments, is creating new heritage sort of products that allow people to engage with these monuments beyond the long distance walking trail. And so John G. Swagger, artist and illustrator, and myself put together, funded by, among others, the Offa's Dyke Association and the University of Chester, a What's Dyke Wrexham Comic Heritage Trail, where through a map, you can download it as a PDF here in English and in Welsh, but via a map online you can access different points along the line of a stretch of What's Dyke that runs through Wrexham and see where it is surviving in various different stages and qualities, but it links to the story of the broader landscape and the communities that still live in it. So, for example, at the River Allen, you can sort of look out at how the monument may have once looked, and here's our interpretation of it, and a little explanation about what this tells us about the early medieval monument. Or you can go to other locations, such as the football ground in Wrexham, where the line of the monument is only survives next to the railway line in fractions and fragments, and there's a part of a reconstructed bank next to the Premier Inn. But largely it's gone, and yet it's an integral part of the townscape, or now cityscape, now that Wrexham's got city status. So my point is, using this method of online comic trail, it is a new way in which people can gain access to where these early medieval Dark Age monuments have survived, but also large stretches where they have now become lost within farmland and, or indeed, beneath townscapes, and also to encourage people to get out and visit them. So these are just 3 examples. This led me on to another idea which I've shared on my Archaeodeath blog, namely, can we use the idea of the iconic London Underground tube map to link together many of the sites where these linear earthworks are being preserved in various different scales and characters of preservation? So as an experiment, I put together an underground and overground Wattsdyke and the northern part of Offansdyke tube map, using the style of the London Underground, and this has been adapted and used in many different heritage contexts, but explicitly to link up parts of linear monuments that were physical unitary entities built in the 8th and early 9th centuries AD, to sites where you can see the monument surviving well, see the monument in a damaged state in various different scales of preservation. The ditch has been filled in, the bank has been destroyed, to sites where it's long gone, but archaeologists have found stretches of it. So I thought I'd pick out the key locations on Wattsdyke, running from Basingwork Abbey on the Dee estuary down to Maysbury in northern Shropshire, and the northern stretches of Offansdyke from Coedtallen Banks and Freeth in Flintshire right the way down to Trevonnan in North Shropshire, as a way of simplifying and articulating beyond the walking trails where you can visit some of these sites, where you can actually go and see these 2 linear monuments. And while I've had some positive feedback about this, and it's never gone any further than just an idea for my blog, this led me then to think about how we could do something very similar for Dark Age Chester and its environs. And those points, my work on the Heritage Trail comic for Wrexham, my work with the Offansdyke Collaboratory, my awareness that the early Middle Ages is still popularly considered a Dark Age because people don't necessarily know which sites date to this period, has all inspired me to create these new Chester Dark Age tube maps. And so here's the great reveal. So I've actually created 2 tube maps, one for Chester itself. This is the Chester Dark Age tube map in its rough draft form, and I look forward to feedback and I can revise it if anyone has any suggestions of sites I should take off or add on. But this is my idea for the Chester Dark Age tube map, to give you 2 little heritage trails where you can go and visit different sites along related to the story of Chester after Rome and before the Norman conquest. And I'll take you through them in a minute. But this is one of 2. So we've got 2 lines I've put on. One I've called the Dee line because it's on sites that are along the River Dee. And I start with the early medieval church site of Eccleston. And while the church is late medieval and the ruins are the modern church is post-medieval, 19th century, the circular churchyard and the place name has strongly hinted to archaeologists and historians that Eccleston may have been an early church site. We have Herron Bridge, which is the site of the Battle of Chester, where we have skeletons excavated with battle trauma linked to this early 7th century battle between the Britons and the King of Northumbria, Ethelfrith. But also we've got a fortification that comes up from the Dee and to Watling Street, which may date to the early 7th century, built over the site of a Roman station on the Roman road. Edgar's Field is a 19th century association with the famous rowing of King Edgar to St John's Priory by the kings of Britain, but it's a site where there's a piece of wonderful artwork, and it's linked now to the story or the legends of early medieval Chester and the importance of Chester for the kings of England establishing their hegemony over the rest of these islands. Then we go to Lower Bridge Street, where archaeological excavations have found traces of the Saxon Burr established from AD 907 by Ethelflaed, queen of the Mercians. She's the Lady of Mercia in popular parlance. She has appears in The Last Kingdom and in the TV show Vikings as a key character. And then we have the Esplanade in Castle, and I put that on because it was at the Esplanade, Castle Esplanade, where the famous silver hoard was excavated and is now being curated by the Grosvenor Museum. So a hoard of coins and ingots and other items. And then we have the Rudy Cross, which is probably a late medieval cross, but is on a location where it may have been a Saxon cross, a cross of early medieval date. And so that's the sort of following the D down from Eccleston to the Rudy and giving you a tour of sites that had importance in the early Middle Ages. And I've added to that a Burr and Cross line running from the Saxon Burr, established in 907, and sites that may have been established and important before that throughout to the Grosvenor Park. So the ongoing excavations at Grosvenor Park are revealing some early medieval ditch and other traces. We have St John's Priory, which is the only site where you can go and see stone sculpture dating from the early Middle Ages, the crosses within the priory and some of the other stonework demonstrably suggest this is a important site, possibly as early as the 7th century, but definitely by the 10th, 11th century. Perhaps a minster outside the Roman ruins that is established in the late 7th century and continues as an important ecclesiastical centre through the period. Of course, briefly a cathedral in the 12th century. St John's Priory was the premier church outside the bounds of the medieval city, and it may have an important early origin. Excavations at the Roman amphitheatre have yet to be published in full for the early medieval phases, but preliminary work is suggesting there are hints of possibly 7th, 8th century activity around the amphitheatre. Was it refortified, or was it actually part of the ecclesiastical complex of St John's? We have the Burr Walls. It's been argued that the Roman fortress defences were extended to create a burh, but for the West Saxon dynasty by extending the walls to the river. And while there's nothing to see at this location, this is to point that out on the Heritage Walk, that the extension of the medieval walls may have first taken place in the 10th century. Then we come to Lower Bridge Street, where, as I said, there is excavations of proved evidence of 10th, 11th century activity and possibly some earlier pre-Burr activity. And then into the Roman fortress itself. And I've put on 5 sites here, although this is a simplification of a more complex phenomenon. St Peter's and the High Cross, the Church of St Peter's, may have been a 10th century foundation over the Roman ruins, or maybe even earlier. The shrine of St Werburgh, St Werburgh of Handley, her relics were moved and translated, possibly by Ethelfled, into the Roman fortress as part of the consolidation of the Burr's holy status, as well as its administrative, mercantile and military functions. We also have evidence of early medieval activity at Abbey Green and at Hamilton Place and Hunter Street and various other locations in the former Roman fortress, some of which may date back to the 6th, 7th centuries, but some of it is definitely associated with the Burr of the 10th, 11th centuries. And I put the North Gate on here to remind you in your tour that this northern access point to the ruins of the Roman fortress seems to have been maintained, whether there was anything particularly fortified there, but it seems to have been maintained through to the Middle Ages. So that route up the spine of the Wirral coming into the North Gate of the Roman fortress is maintained, and Northgate does follow a line that is carved out, if not by the 10th century, then earlier. So I suppose my point is that this notional tube map is a way of taking you to places that were important in the early medieval story of Chester, based on fragmentary evidence, but linking the later medieval city and the earlier Roman occupation, and therefore giving you that sense of that there are sites and artifacts and places where there's maybe not much to see. And as I said, it's only in St John's Priory where you can see some monuments from the early Middle Ages, but you can link up the story to sites where places linked to the heritage and the story of early medieval Chester, Dark Age Chester. But if that isn't enough, I've also done a Dark Age Borderlands tube map, which adapts the key sites on Wattsdyke in red and Offarsdyke in orange, where you can see surviving traces of these late 8th, early 9th century linear earthworks built by the Mercian kings, but also a green line which connects together many of the early medieval sites and monuments of this region, spanning the English and Welsh border, from the Huxley Hoard to the site where the Tarvin Cross was found, Plempstle associated with St Plegmund, an early medieval saint, down to Chester, Eccleston, a little short branch line to Caergurley or Caergowla, which is the site of a, before the later medieval castle, there's evidence of a early medieval fortified hilltop site. Farndon, the site of a possible monastery, and the death site of Edward the Elder, the son of Alfred the Great. The famous early medieval monastery of Bangor on Dee, through to Rwabon, where both the linear earthworks, Wattsdyke and Offarsdyke, can be seen, as well as the Church of St Mary's, which may be an early ecclesiastical site, to Castell Dinas Bran, mainly known as an Iron Age hill fort and later medieval castle, but quite possibly an early medieval fortified site, as the work I've done with Dr. Patricia Morieta Flores on the landscape context of the Dee and the Vale of Llangollen shows, to Valley Cruces Abbey, a late medieval monastery, but possibly on the site of an earlier Welsh monastery of Llangwestel, and the Pillar of Elyseg, a enigmatic early 9th century cross on a far older early Bronze Age burial mound. Going up from Chester up the Wirral, we get into the sites associated with churches and early medieval carved stone monuments, mainly dating to the Viking Age, when the Wirral and the area on the opposite shore of the Dee may have been a part of a sort of Hiberno-Scandinavian enclave and trading zone, as well as area linked to Chester. Now we have the pre-Viking Overchurch monument, which is a runic inscription suggesting an important church site in and around Overchurch or Landican in the sort of 8th, 9th century. Then we have the Mel site, which is a beach market site, a trading site, which seems to be a long-running site of trade and exchange from the Iron Age through the early Middle Ages. And then West Kirby, Irby, where we have archaeological evidence of Viking Age settlement. West Kirby has a hogback stone and St Bridget's Church, and also other traces of early medieval stonework. Neston likewise, and Bromborough, possible site of the Battle of Brunanburh, but certainly an early ecclesiastical site with stone sculpture. Hilbury Island, where recent work by Rob Philpott has found evidence of a possible early medieval building, and we have early medieval stone sculpture from there. And across the Dee we have Talacra, where there's a possible Viking burial, and the famous 10th century cross of Mynachwyvan, which is a wonderful standing monument of the early Middle Ages for you to see. So, while complicated and messy and rather contrived, this kind of tube map might be a helpful way to get people into, a gateway into the complex fragments that we have from early medieval West Cheshire and northeast Wales that tell us the story of the peoples living in this region between the 5th and the 11th centuries. Now, to explain a lot of that, you'll have to come to my talk on the 27th, and hopefully that'll fill in some of the gaps of what some of these sites mean and how these monuments relate to each other. The great two linear earthworks of Wattsdyke and Offarsdyke, and some of these church sites, carved stone monuments, and other sites with early medieval associations and traditions connected to them. So this is my little introduction to two things: the Dark Age, the Chester Dark Age tube map, and the Dark Age Borderlands tube map, which I think together, I hope, I'm going to post on my blog, and will provide a sort of useful sort of supporting guide to my talk on After Rome, Chester in the Dark Ages. Thank you very much.